Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We are thankful for your presence at today's lecture. I'm Felipe Villada, Senior Research Associate for Latin America in Prints and Drawings, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the first program for the exhibition Paula Modersohn-Becker, I Am Me, which officially opens tomorrow. As we begin, a brief reminder to please silence your mobile devices. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce this afternoon's speaker and the curator of our exhibition, J.A. Clarke. Jay is the Rothman family curator of prints and drawings at the Art Institute of Chicago. Prior to rejoining the museum in 2018, she held the position of Manton curator of prints, drawings, and photographs at the Clarke Art Institute, while also lecturing in the graduate art history program at Williams College. Her accomplishments are vast and impressive, but I'll highlight just a few. Jay curated the groundbreaking exhibition Becoming Edward Munch, Influence, Anxiety, and Myth, and co-curated last year's Picasso Drawing from Life, both held here at the Art Institute. In 2022, she curated Bridget Riley drawings from the Artist Studio, which traveled to the Hammer Museum and the Morgan Library and Museum. Additionally, she curated the Impressionist line from Degas to Toulouse-Lautrec at the Clarke in 2017. She's also contributed to and edited numerous publications, including Edward Munch, Trembling Earth in 2023, and Picasso Encounters in 2017. Jay is widely regarded as the leading scholar on Kath Kollwitz, Edward Munch, German art from the turn of the century, and of course, Paula Modersohn-Becker. She holds both a master's and a PhD from Brown University. I also want to acknowledge Jay's generosity as a mentor. I've had the privilege of working with her for a year through the development of this exhibition and learning a lot from her mentorship over the past year. Today, we gather to celebrate Jay's most recent accomplishment as the curator of the exhibition Paula Modersohn-Becker, I Am Me. Please join me now in welcoming J.A. Clarke to the stage.
Thank you so much, Felipe. I really could not have done this exhibition without him. He was working on this exhibition with me, as he said, the last year, and even though he works on contemporary Latin American art, I dragged him back into the 19th century. And he does not know a lick of German and managed to do this show, and now he's fluent. I'm kidding, he's not, but that's okay. So we had this, it was a wonderful collaboration with the Neue Gallery of New York, where this exhibition opened in June, a beautiful museum on the Upper East Side that focuses on German and Austrian art. So those of you who have not been there, please do go. My co-curator is Jill Lloyd. She's unfortunately couldn't be here today, but she's giving I know what will be an amazing talk next month on the friendship between Paula Modersohn-Becker and Rainer Maria Rilke, the poet. They were good friends, which you hear a tiny bit more about. Wonderful Art Institute of Chicago team, especially Kylie and Ariana. And my colleague Richard did a beautiful exhibition design, which I hope you will all see later if you haven't seen it already. We had a very exciting collaboration with the Paula Modersohn-Becker Foundation and the Paula Modersohn-Becker Museum, both in Bremen, which I will show you on the map in case you don't know where it is. They helped immensely with this exhibition in terms of research and in terms of loans, of course. So Modersohn-Becker has an unusual position in the annals of art history. She's really neither here nor there in terms of, an artistic style. On the left, show you one of our museum favorites, Claude Monet's Water Lily Pond. Very much epitomizes French Impressionism. She wanted to move away from French Impressionism and do something different. And the people that came after her, such as Ernst Ludwig Kirchner, we see his Striding into the Sea from 1912, is one of the artists she greatly influenced in a style known as Expressionism, which is a nearly abstract style, an embrace of the human figure, which we'll talk about as well. But she really sort of was in between these two styles. So in terms of the art history books, sometimes she's been forgotten or left out. However, in the 1970s, with the rise of feminist studies, especially in art history, people became very interested in Modersohn-Becker, and I think you'll find out why. She's very well known in Germany. The Paula Modersohn-Becker Museum was founded in 1927 as the first museum ever devoted to a woman artist. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. All right. And she hasn't been collected a great deal by American museums. There's a handful of works in American museums, which a couple of them you'll see in the exhibition. This is the first US museum retrospective of the artist. And I'm showing you two images here. This is a museum in, brain freeze, Hanover. Hanover? Yes, Hanover, on the left. So where you walk into a museum in the US, especially Chicago, you may see Van Gogh as their marquee artist or Monet as their marquee artist. In German museums, Modersohn-Becker. And on the right, I show you just an example of the alleyway which walks into the Paula Modersohn-Becker Museum in Bremen. She's even on a stamp. She's that well known, and we're very lucky to have the portrait that is the model for this stamp in the exhibition. Just a beautiful work. So these are just two installation shots from the exhibition. Today we're going to look at her life and her artistic training, and which we see on the left. These are two large-scale drawings that were really done very early in her career when she was still training. And then I'm going to guide through the exhibition to the next section of the exhibition, which looks mostly at her paintings. The artist made 700 paintings and over 1,400 drawings in her very short 7-year career, prior to her death at age 31. So instead of presenting them chronologically, which you might do in some exhibitions, here's what came first, here's what came next, she had such a short production period that we really decided to not do it chronologically. So her early years were in Bremen, and here you see Paula here with her sister in a studio photograph. This is the town of Bremen, a beautiful town with a beautiful Gothic square. And just to give you a sense of where we are on the map, I can't really see it from here, but Bremen is up here. Munich is down here, Berlin is over there, Cologne is over here. So it's really the very northern part of Germany. So early on, she trained at what was called the Berlin Association of Women Artists, and I show you a poster here of one of their exhibitions. And then here we see Paula with her friends in Berlin. There she is on the right. Although she was raised in an educated, forward-thinking bourgeois family, and her parents really supported her pursuit of a career, because they knew if she wanted to be economically independent and not be dependent on a man. But her path to become an artist was certainly not an easy one. She first took teacher training courses in Bremen because becoming a teacher was seen as something that was somewhat socially acceptable for a woman at the time. But she continued to take private drawing instruction while she was doing her teacher training. In 1896, she began 2 years a full-time art student in Berlin, and again, we see her left in Berlin. Now, in Germany, women were denied entrance to the state art academies until 1919, which was actually the same year women got the vote. Prior to that, institutions such as this Association for Women Artists, where she took classes, the cost was up to 6 times as much as an education at the Berlin Academy where men were admitted. So, it was really only open to the upper class and the middle class. After her first year, she thought she was going to have to leave the school, in part because of the cost, but then she came upon unexpected inheritance from a family member, and she was able to continue on for another year. So these are examples of some of her early drawings. Some of them the two portraits on the left and then the figure study in the middle may seem a little bit clunky. We were all students at some point in our career, right? But on the right, we see her really achieving her maturity. And this is the first drawing chronologically in the exhibition from the Cleveland Museum of Art. As the artist's drawing and her own personality became more confident around 1897, 1898, thanks to the guidance of her most influential instructor in Berlin, the Swedish-German painter Jenna Bauck, and we see a portrait of her on the left. Modersohn-Becker described Bauck as warm, unconventional, and refreshingly uninterested in her appearance. She wrote to her parents that Bauck hoped to awaken in her students, quote, an artistic vision on a higher plane and infinitely more difficult to acquire than those embraced by the other teachers of the school. This unconventional nature in her teaching was probably part of the reason she was fired from the Berlin Women's Association. And then she opened up her own private studio where Modersohn-Becker took courses. And I show you just one drawing. You can see Modersohn-Becker really moving into her own. And I chose it also because my daughter told me it looked like me. So then she moves from Berlin to Worpswede, which we can all say that 3 times fast, Worpswede. It is a small community outside of Bremen, just about 30 minutes north of Bremen, which I was very fortunate to be able to visit. And I must say, having been there, it really helped me understand the artist being in her environment. She admired these painters who had a sort of art union, a group in and of themselves, the Worpswede painters. She'd admired them for several years. And this landscape, as you can see in the 2 paintings, was filled with moors, and the poor villages made their living by digging peat out of the earth and selling it as an alternative use for fuel. So they would dig the peat out, which is like a kind of mud, form it into bricks, put it into boats like you see on the right. The boats would go down the canals, and eventually they would sell them into the cities, such as Bremen. This village was established in the 13th century. It was a very boggy land and difficult to farm, but filled with wetland that was very useful for grazing livestock. And not unlike the Barbizon painters outside of Paris or the Dachau artist colony outside of Munich, beginning in the late 19th century, artists such as the Worpswede painters came in search of a untouched paradise far away from the industrializing cities such as Munich and Berlin. And they were really looking for spaces that were rife with picturesque imagery for their canvases. Modersohn-Becker, who you see a portrait of, a beautiful portrait, photographic portrait, sitting in Worpswede in profile. She was filled with enthusiasm and excitement for the first time as a professional artist. So she moved there, really finishing her studies and saying, okay, I'm leaving my parents' home, I'm leaving school, I'm becoming a professional artist in and of myself. And she wrote in her diaries, quote, I want to go further and further. I can hardly wait until I'm a real artist, unquote. And I think it's important here to show you the painting below her was by Otto Modersohn, who would later become her husband. But this is the primary kind of imagery that you saw from these Worpswede painters, really far out, panographic views of the moors, the sky, the trees, and we'll see Paula Modersohn-Becker does something very different. So many of the artists there really focused on a remove, as I said, from industrial society, and they very much romanticized the people that lived there, but they lived apart from them. They rarely depicted people that lived there, focusing on the landscape. As we can see, here's sort of the home where many of the villagers lived that looks like it's sort of falling down, and some, just the suggestion of human presence in the print on the right. The cohort of artists known as the Worpswede Art Colony began to exhibit collectively, and they became well-known, and they had a measure of commercial success. And so this status and the fact that they were written about in the newspapers and being shown in more and more exhibitions attracted an influx of other artists to then join the Worpswede artist community. Artists like Fritz Mackensen, who we see here on the left, attracted a good number of artists, mostly women artists. And this is in part because they then opened art schools. So this is how the artists themselves survived. except for selling their art, they could open these women's art academies. And you see women walking into the Worpswede landscape, women and men, but primarily women. So Modersohn-Becker applied, as it were, to work with him, not necessarily as a student, but as sort of a, I guess you could say an intern in a way. She wasn't really a student status, but she was learning from him. So some of the work she made while she was studying with Mackensen were these very large-scale drawings. And just to give you an idea of scale, I show you two of the drawings in the exhibition. I've never seen anything else like them, and we'll talk a little bit more about them later. But they're mostly the people who lived in the town of Worpswede. And here I show you some very large-scale two nudes in the exhibition. And it may be hard to see, but I was in Bremen 2 years ago with my co-curator, Jill, and you can see her reflection maybe in the glass on the far left. And we were in storage looking at these drawings, and I was like, these are absolutely unbelievable. I can't, I never in a million years thought that we would be able to borrow them, and then yet here they are sitting or hanging on our walls in the museum. So they're really quite extraordinary. So Modersohn-Becker's depictions of the Worpswede models contrast strikingly with those of her peers. As we saw, the people were really sort of in the distance. They weren't focused on. And regarding the paintings of her contemporaries, her male contemporaries, Mackensen, Hans am Ende, Otto Modersohn, Overbeck, and Heinrich Vogeler, the poet, her friend Rainer Marie Rilke, said, quote, "And what are the painters doing among these people? It must be said they do not live among them, but as it were face them, the way they face trees and all things that grow or move in their embrace in the damp, earthy air. They come from afar. They push these people down. They are not of their kind. They push them into the landscape." So this notion of they really didn't see them as equals. And again, we see this example here of Overbeck, her teacher. You barely see the people in the works of art, but she is really right up close. You see everything on this woman's face and in her clothing. And she very much saw them as equals. And here we see two other drawings. Her main models came from what was known as a poorhouse, people that had no home, they had no family, they had no money, and so they lived in these poorhouses. And not only were they thrilled for the small amount of money that Modersohn-Becker could pay them to model for her, but they were affordable for someone who didn't have a lot of money herself, affordable for her to pay these models. And you see two of them here. And one thing I think is quite extraordinary here is what you see and what you don't see. We know this woman's sitting on a chair, but you just barely see the chair here. We know this woman is weaving, but all you see is this tiny little string, and you don't really see the apparatus. She's really focusing on their actions and on their faces. They're just really extraordinary drawings. And Modersohn-Becker visited museums a lot. She visited museums all over Germany. And one of the artists she really admired was the 16th century artist Lucas Cranach, who we see a painting by him on the right. And I think you can see some similarities here. Again, she had a really abiding, very warm affection for the people that she depicted. She was interested in their habits and their desires, and she wrote about them quite frequently in her diaries and letters. And her early biography wrote this, quote, "She speaks the language of these people in Worpswede, listens to stories about their hardships and their deaths, and dances with the father of the bride at poor people's weddings." So again, she didn't look down on them. She saw them very much as her equal, as she should have. So she drew and painted these villagers, but talked with them endlessly, sympathetically, really one-on-one. And her letters and journals recount many fascinating conversations she had with the children, a young girl who had been beaten by her parents and abandoned, or an old man who had lost his memory and just kept telling her stories over and over again. And this is an example of her displaying some of these drawings. This is her friend Clara Westhoff, who we'll see a little bit later. Paula on the left, Clara Westhoff, and we see one of her drawings above them. So she, she had them in her studio. And one of the things I find extraordinary about these drawings are not only how she shows this very exacting profile of this woman's face, who's, by the way, she did not choose a beautiful model. She wasn't interested in that. She wanted to see just like an average person with a characteristic face and a characteristic profile. And then you see, the drawing that she does on the left of the background is almost like an abstract expressionist painting. It's absolutely extraordinary. And I love that aspect of it. And here we see two drawings which probably have the same model. We see the girl in different positions, sitting, standing, crouching, and then the girl who we see again on the right. And I must just share a quick story. When I was working on something else entirely different, a different exhibition maybe 15 years ago or more, I went into the private collection of this home and I went around the corner and I said, "You've got to be kidding me. You have this drawing here." I'd never seen, again, the only large-scale drawing I ever saw by her until I started working on this project. And one of the interesting things she would explain in her journal, "I'm drawing nudes in the evening now, life-size, beginning with little Meta Fijol and her pious Saint Cecilia face. When I told her she should take all her clothes off, she said, 'Oh no, I ain't doing none of that.' So at first she only got half undressed. So sometimes she really had to convince her, and we're going to talk a little bit more about her nudity and her approach to nudity later. This is a beautiful drawing in the Art Institute of Chicago's collection, and I think it's quite relevant that this drawing was bought by a curator who used to work at who was the head of the Princeton Drawings Department at the Art Institute in 1798, and he was a German. So I think he knew of Modersohn-Becker, whereas Americans really didn't. So we're very fortunate to have this drawing in our collection. And I always thought this was like a kind of leaf or a plant or a flower. And now, of course, I can see so clearly it's a chair. She's sitting on a chair. But now I know the artist's work better. But I think that ability to make something slightly strange off the edges is quite fascinating and very Modersohn-Becker. The same year she was making these huge, large-scale drawings, she was making these tiny little prints. But I think they tell a story that we really don't know much about yet, something I'd like to explore further. But she was taught by her friend Heinrich Vogler, whose print is on the left. And this is a wonderful print by Modersohn-Becker in the center called Goose Girl. And it's just two women sitting with their heads bowed and this strange gaggle of geese going towards them. And I think what's happening here is this is a kind of well. Like here we go down into the well, and this bulbous thing would go up and down into the well so you could get your water. But I was very lucky. I'm an absolute dork, as my children will tell you, and a geek. But I was very lucky to see the press on which she printed this in Worpswede, Germany, which is quite a wonderful experience. And I show you two more prints here, Portrait of a Peasant Woman on the left and Blind Woman in the Forest, which is also known as Blind Woman Playing the Piano. It really could be either one, and I just want you to notice these wonderful mushrooms growing up here. There's so much atmosphere. And here we see a portrait of her in her Worpswede studio, and she loved this area early on. I have one quote from her: "Worpswede, Worpswede, Worpswede, birches, birches, pine trees, and old willows, beautiful brown moors, exquisite brown, a wonderland, a land of the gods." And here we see two early self-portraits by her. And I think Modersohn-Becker's focus on issues of identity makes her work particularly resonant in our own time. Like many people today, like many artists today, Modersohn-Becker was on a voyage of self-discovery. She was determined to really explore the boundaries of her identity and what it meant to be a woman right around 1900, as a woman and as a human being, but first and foremost, really as an artist. And it was this highly personal journey that really had her just desiring to be known, to be understood, to be seen as an artist, and to realize her full potential. She began to paint regularly after she made this series of drawings that we've looked at, and I show you two self-portraits here, which are very, very gentle, very feminine, very different from what we'll see later. She made a small but strong series of landscapes, and again, when we compare her to her male peers, we see Modersohn-Becker's on the left. We see just like a short, cut out of what is an entire birch tree. Whereas with Modersohn-Becker, you see the whole panoramic view. She's interested in just, having this strange, unusual perspective on the birch trees. And then here I show you two other landscapes by her. She had a deep underlying affinity with the Worpswede landscape and its occupants. And many times she imbued them with sort of anthropomorphic associations. And I read you one quote. She described the silver birch trees as, quote, delicate, slender young virgins who delight the eye. Some are already masculine and bold, with strong and straight trunks. Those are my modern women. So she saw the birch trees as, sort of her friends. And if we see these two on the left and the right, we can see just a small section of the birch tree here, but what we don't see are the leaves on the top. But in this sort of lollipop-like shadow here, that's the rest of the tree, which we see in the reflection. And here again, in this beautiful moor canal from Dresden, we don't see the sky, but we see the sky reflected in the water. So she had quite an unusual view, exaggerated, sort of unusual angles. At this time, she started creating a series of young women in the birch forest and a series of depictions of children, more young girls than other. And I should say part of the reason that her models are older men and women, young women, and then nursing mothers is because everyone else is out in the fields or in the moors working. These are the only models really available to her. Everyone else, had to be out earning money. But at this time, there was really a new understanding in child psychology. Children were no longer seen as small adults, but they were perceived with sympathy as educators began to think about personal responsibility and their own ability to have self-perception and self-expression. The Swedish feminist writer Ellen Key wrote a book called The Century of the Child in 1900, where these radical views on the rights of children and the rights of women and mothers were set forth. And these were very much known by Paula Modersohn-Becker. Whoops. One of the things you'll see as you look at these paintings is there's incredible texture to many of them. And I show you a close-up of the girl blowing a horn. She used a mixture of oil and tempera. And what she did is she would scrape in, you can see it here, and you can see it even more in the paintings themselves. She would scrape in with another instrument, with her fingernail, with the end of her paintbrush, and create different kinds of texture within the surface of the paint itself. This painting on the left is called don't know what that was, Girl in a Red Dress, and it's from Harvard. And this was a painting I really wanted to include in the exhibition because I think paintings like this, definitely during her lifetime, and maybe even up until now, might be perceived as ugly, like an ugly little girl. But there's a raw beauty in their ugliness that I think is really a very important part of her work. Even her husband, who deeply admired her work and her ability to simplify and capture essentials of a particular subject, wrote in his journal that he found the aggressive elements in his life and his wife's work very difficult to understand. He said, quote, Paula hates the conventional, hands like spoons, noses like bulbs, mouths like wounds, expressions like cretins. And it was precisely this aspect of her work, the really raw, very abstracted sensibility that the German expressionists so admired later on. And I show you one example of a woodcut by Carl Schmidt-Rutloff from just 10 years later, which sort of captured some of these qualities, a kind of mask-like face. But I hope you'll agree that there's a real beauty in some of these works as well. This is just a completely different kind of image. She looks like a fairy princess in the forest, like a giant mushroom growing out of the land, just a very different kind of picture. She also did these hauntingly beautiful images of young children and babies, and I just absolutely, gush every time I'm in front of these. They're just very, very beautiful small-scale works. In 1900, she took her first very important trip to Paris, and she'd studied at the Académie Colarossi, and we see a photograph of men and women studying in this academy. It was mostly not French artists, but mostly artists from Germany and other places studying there. And she also went to art galleries, very importantly, and studied the work of her contemporaries, Edgar Degas, Claude Monet, Paul Cézanne. So she was looking at contemporary art at the same time when she was painting. She then comes home from Paris and becomes engaged to Otto Modersohn, one of the painters she very much admired. Otto's first wife had died in 1900, and Paula accepted his proposal of marriage. But she also, importantly, became stepmother to his daughter, Elspeth. So her parents very much wanted her to give up painting, and so they sent her for cooking lessons in Berlin because they said, you need to, something I never quite mastered myself, but she really wasn't sure if she wanted to give up her painting career, but again, her parents very much thought she would, and they said, you need to be a mother to Elsbeth, you need to learn how to cook, you need to learn how to take care of the family. And this isn't to say she was not deeply attached to Modersohn and his younger daughter, but their correspondence attests to a mutual love. But it was agreed upon their marriage that she would keep her own artist studio, which I had the fortune of, literally a room of one's own, which I had the fortune of seeing. And at the outset, she seemed optimistic that she could successfully combine the roles of wife and mother. And again, her parents were very, very much against this, but she wrote to her mother in November of 1900, "Just because I'm getting married is no reason for me to turn into a nothing." And we see her portrait of Otto Modersohn-Becker sleeping, and a lovely photograph of him, just to give you a sense. This is her very good friend in Worpswede, Clara Westhoff. And this is sort of an interesting comparison because Paula Modersohn-Becker made a portrait of her on the left, and then Clara Westhoff made a portrait of Paula Modersohn-Becker on the right. She was a sculptor who worked with, trained under Auguste Rodin. And then here we see her dear friend, Rainer Marie Rilke. And it's been interesting working on this exhibition because I'll say even people that work in the museum with me, I'm working in this Paula Modersohn-Becker show, people have not heard of him. And I said, one of her best friends was Rainer Marie Rilke. No, him I've heard of. A lot of people have heard of Rilke. She did a small but very powerful group of still lives. And we show you one on the left that is from the Art Institute of Chicago's collection. And I have to say, until I learned more about Modersohn-Becker, I thought it was kind of a B painting. Not an A, not a C, but a B. I thought it was like an okay painting. But the more I learned about it and the more I looked at it, I think it's quite fascinating. This is the textile that she puts this tiny little vase with flowers on it, and it really just takes on a life of its own. It tips up against the picture plane, very much like these here, these other. They really have, they take on a life of their own. It's not just about the still life, but it's about the textures of the fabrics that she puts these things on. And one quote of her that I love is she says, "I must learn how to express the gentle vibration of things, their roughened textures, their intricacies." And I show you three other still lives by women artists at the same time, Mary Cassatt, Berthe Morisot, and Bertha Wegmann. They're very different. Still life was seen as something that was very appropriate for women artists to depict because it was in the domestic realm. But Paula Modersohn-Becker did something did something very different. She greatly admired Paul Cézanne, and I think you can see that the fabric on which these objects rest really do take on their own action and their own motion. And I encourage you to look closely at this one because it has like little bits of pink in it, pink and purple. And here I show you two more still lives, and she really just used objects that were part of her daily life. You know, you bring home fish from the market that's wrapped in newspaper, you unwrap it, and there you have it. There you have your still life. These paintings are really quite extraordinary, and my colleague Jill and I didn't really know what to call them, so we just decided to call them child idols. And Rilke, I think, said it best. When Paula Modersohn-Becker died very young, Rilke wrote a beautiful requiem for her, and this is one of the poems that he wrote in honor of her. Quote, "For that is what you understand, ripe fruits. You set them before the canvas in white bowls and weighed out each one's fullness with your colors. Women, too, you saw were fruits, and children molded from inside into the shapes of their existence. And at last you saw yourself as a fruit. You stepped out of your clothes and brought your naked body before the mirror. You let yourself inside down into your gaze." And these are really amazing paintings. You see this young girl on the right is sort of on like a dais. She's sort of in this raised area, but they're not really holy figures. They're sort of these pantheistic nudes. It's a real, very interesting series of work she created. When Paula Modersohn-Becker was preparing to leave her husband in 1905, 1906, around the time she made this beautiful painting, she began working on drawings for a large-scale composition, and this paved the way for a series of really revolutionary nudes and self-portrait nudes. She wrote from Paris in 1906 to her friend Martha, "You shall see, now that I'm here, I'm going to make something of myself. With faith in God and in myself, I'm painting life-size nudes and still lives." And here we see a real reverence for motherhood. It's sort of a modern-day mother and child, and it's really a strikingly beautiful work. But there's no context for them. They're just laying on this white cloth, no background, no foreground, just two human bodies in an embrace. And then again, we see another mother and child, again on a sort of raised dais, this white circular element, sort of a exotic modern-day mother and child with a child at her breast. And there's definitely a connection here to Paul Gauguin, who's very well known here at this museum. But Paul Gauguin, these figures were very much exoticized and maybe even eroticized from his time in Tahiti. But Paula Modersohn-Becker, from a woman's perspective, it's very different. And this is one of the most important paintings of her career. Actually, I lost track of my notes here. So she leaves her husband, and she decides she wants to become an artist on her own. She wants to make her own way. She wants to support herself. She wants to live in Paris and paint. And so she creates this beautiful painting, which is a self-portrait. She wasn't pregnant yet, but she shows herself in the early stages of pregnancy. And she says to Rilke, "I feel as if I've been presented with a new life. It's going to be beautiful and rich. If there's something inside me, it's going to be revealed." And then when it came to signing her name, she said, "I don't even know how I should sign my name. I'm not Modersohn, and I'm not Paula Becker anymore either. I am me, and I hope to become me more and more. That is surely the goal of all our struggles." And so here she said, she really feels like she's becoming somebody, but it was very unusual. It's supposed to be the first ever female nude self-portrait painted. So here and she also worked from photographs. Here we see a photograph that probably her sister took of her nude, just really an absolutely extraordinary, groundbreaking painting, and one of the ones that really brought her fame in this country, I would say, via feminist art history, because it was seen as so groundbreaking and so important. And I think it's important to see it in the context of its time. There was something in Germany at the time that was known as Lebensreform, which is basically life reform, where we see an example. The Norwegian artist Edvard Munch spent quite a bit of time in Germany when he was mentally ill, probably from being an alcoholic. But what he did is he would go to the shore and bathe in the nude. So again, it's not a sort of puerile, sexualized nudity. It's like if you're nude, you're in nature, you go in the water, you get the sun, and it can be a kind of a curative aspect. And here we see some drawings by her husband, Otto, sketches of Modersohn-Becker exercising in the nude. It's something she did every morning. She called them her air baths. And she and her husband would sometimes have nude picnics in Worpswede, which the villagers did not appreciate. It was seen as very shocking, and they decided, well, maybe we have to do this inside the hedgerow so no one can see us. And then she started creating these self-portraits with a very sort of a mask-like face. She's not, detailing a face like she was in her early drawings, for example. She's really turning it into more of a mask and an abstract form. And that's part of the reason that we wanted to start with the drawings in the first room. She knew exactly how to draw with physiognomic precision. But what she does later, she's doing on purpose. She's, as they would say in today's nomenclature, de-skilling. She's creating something that's more abstract. And one thing is very important. She's spending a lot of time in the Louvre Museum looking at ancient Fayum portraits. And we see one on the left and two self-portraits of her. She said, "A great simplicity of form is something marvelous. As far back as I can remember, I've tried to put the simplicity of nature into the heads that I was painting and drawing. Now I have a real sense of being able to learn from the heads of ancient art. What grand and simple insight went into their creation." So I think it's important to show again in these self-portraits, the one in the middle, you can barely see her hand, but her hand is holding this small object, a camellia branch. On the right, she's holding a lemon. And then this magnificent self-portrait with two flowers in her raised hand, she did just before her birth. And this was a recent joint purchase by the Neue Gallery and the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And you can see her hand is actually resting on her pregnant belly. So you can see she's showing her pregnancy. She's holding up the flowers as if to say, I'm painting this as one form of creation, and my hand is over another form of creation. Like, I get to do this. I get to be an artist, and I get to be a mother. She went back to, after she left her husband, as I mentioned, just to put in a bit of biography, she left her husband, and then I think in some ways she realized she was not able to support herself financially. And so Otto came to Paris. They became pregnant, and she went back to Worpswede. And here you see just two beautiful portraits. She returns to her depictions of the villagers in Worpswede. And this is a woman who was known as Three Legs because she had a cane. She walked with a cane, just wonderful, large-scale portraits. That summer, she really focused on developing a richer, bolder sense of color. And she wrote to her friend Rilke just prior to her death, "And I still wait and wait for me to become somebody." So she gave birth to her daughter, Tilly. She complained in pains of her legs the day that Tilly was born and the 2 weeks after, and she was advised to not get out of bed by her doctor. And then 2.5 weeks later, she got out of bed and she immediately died from a pulmonary embolism. So one of the things that really brought her fame, and these are just my last two slides, were her letters and diaries. And on the left, I show you one of her actual handwritten letters, and on the right, one of, many, many, many editions of her letters and diaries that have been published in German and English over the years from 1917 to 1998, and they're really a great read, I must say. But I think it's interesting to consider how her personal story and her personal feelings directly connect to her reputation. Biography and the works of art are very much tied together. But her letters and diaries perhaps were famous before her works of art were, which is very interesting. As I mentioned, the Paula Modersohn-Becker Museum was founded in 1927, and as the first museum for the work of a woman artist. And it's absolutely a beautiful, beautiful museum. So I encourage you to go to Bremen. But first, I encourage you to enjoy the show. And thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed learning a bit more about Paula Modersohn-Becker today. Those of you who need to leave, please go right ahead. But we do have some time for questions. So if you wouldn't mind, if you have a question, if you could please raise your hand so the staff will bring a microphone to you so everyone else can hear your question. Just hopefully not a question I can't answer. Oh, we're going to wait just a minute while people file out. What? Oh, somebody raising. Okay. Okay, I think we're ready for questions if anyone has one.
Yes.
Oh, yes, question here. We're just
I'll be down in just a moment. Thank you all for your patience.
She's trapped. Okay, she's coming down. Just wait a minute. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful exhibit. I just had a few moments to observe it. It was a wonderful exhibit. Thank you for bringing it to us. I was really impressed by the variety of styles that we see here in such a short period of time. And it seemed to me, as I was looking at it, I was seeing Gauguin, I was seeing Matisse, I was seeing Picasso, I was seeing the Expressionists. So it was all really lovely. I do have one question, which is, I was amazed at the large charcoal portraits, the life size. And I looked, the paper seems to be one sheet. And I'm wondering how the conservation of that lasted all this time, because they look like they're in great shape.
No,
and with charcoal, I don't know how that happens.
Yeah,
so.
that's a great question. Two of them are on a kind of board, sort of a thick board. The rest are on, probably very good paper, because they lasted for a long time. My colleague Maria Cristina did conservation on our drawing, and as you may know, it's very difficult to treat charcoal because it's very friable. It's very powdery. But a lot of those drawings were actually found in a trunk many years after her death. People went into her studio and opened up this trunk and found hundreds and hundreds of drawings just rolled up in there. So they really have, I think there's a lot more to be done on the drawings and the conservation of the drawings and the media used and the paper used, because it was only just in the last few months the first catalogue raisonné of her drawings was published. So no one knew about these drawings. The only way you know about them is if you're like, as I said, a total dork like me, and you go to Bremen and you ask to see box after box after box. And I saw them and I thought, why doesn't anyone know about these? They're so extraordinary. And part of it could be media. Drawings are seen as less than paintings. Or part of it just could be it's like a catch-22. They're not known, so they're not written about, so they're not written about, so they're not known, and they're not shown. But, the reviews many reviews of the exhibition that came out when this was in New York, people were really struck by the drawings. People really, so I don't think I really answered your question. I don't really know the answer to your question 100% because I haven't seen that many out of their frames, but I do know it was very good paper she used. So that certainly helps. And very few are fixed. So fixing is what you do when you have a charcoal and you want to keep the media on the surface. It's kind of like, the best example I can do is you kind of put hairspray on it so the media stays on top of the paper. It's not hairspray. But she didn't fix her works. So it's incredible they survive.
Jay,
Yes? Sorry, whoever.
we have a question on to your right, Jay.
Over here?
Yeah, over here.
Okay, thank you.
I saw the exhibit this morning, and I was really struck by one painting in particular where her hands were almost bulbous.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in other paintings from other artists around that same time, the 1910s and 20s. Any comment on why lots of people were painting that, particularly with the hands so incredibly distorted?
Yeah, I actually, the Bremen, the Paula Modersohn-Becker Museum did an exhibition of her drawings specifically right when we were organizing this, and they said, you can write about, we'd like you to write on one work by her. And I said, I want to write on the drawing with the hands, which is not here on view in this exhibition. But an artist who I think of immediately is Käthe Kollwitz, who was her contemporary, she was a Berlin artist. But they unbelievably didn't know each other, even though they're in the same city at the same time, in the same art school around the same time, but they just missed each other. To me, I see it as a sign of strength. A lot of the women, not only in her self-portraits, but in the other portraits, you see this not only is it the artist's hand in a way, but I think it's like the strength of the hand and also the worker's hands, So I don't know if I have a great answer for you, but I absolutely agree. The hands are a very important aspect of our work, and I really encourage you all to look at the hands closely as you walk through the exhibition. Good question.
Jay, we have another question right over here.
Great.
Thank you. I've been following Paula probably since the mid-'70s, and this is not so much a question, it's a question more about her life. When she got married, again, she was very interested in art, very passionate about art, but my understanding, there was a tremendous amount of pressure placed upon her by her family to get married, to settle down. And she eventually did that with Otto.
Yeah.
And then after being with Otto for a while, she was thinking, hey, this may not be a very good idea.
Yeah.
And then she headed to Paris.
Yep.
And again, had a wonderful time there, a great time there, met so many wonderful artists, so well respected. And then once again, you had mentioned, well, she came back to Otto because she didn't have any money. But once again, my understanding was there are many letters from her family, many letters from Otto saying, go back. Go back
please
to
come
Otto.
back. Please come back.
Be traditional, raise a family, have kids.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of gets me in my heart is that you have this cultural pressure manifested coming from family and from Otto to do these things, to get married, to come back from Paris, to have a family. And in many respects, I see that as the reason her career was cut short.
Yeah.
If she could do what she had wanted to do, we would have many more works by her, and she would be more famous worldwide than she is right now.
No, I think,
what about my perspective and my feelings here? Is there any veracity to them?
No, I think it's really interesting. It's something I've thought a lot about. I don't think we can blame poor Otto for killing his wife. But I see your point. But one thing I find quite interesting, and I have to be careful how I say this because my mother's in the audience, but she did have an affair when she went to Paris. And she and Otto did not consummate their marriage for 6 years. So I have heard, if there's other people in the audience that want to disagree. So they had and I think part of it is she was very afraid to die in childbirth. That was a real concern for women at the time. She wrote about it in her letters. I might die before I'm known. I might die young. I might die in childbirth. And of course, And of course she does. So, you know, it's hard to know why she went back to him. It could have been financial. It could have been she missed him, because one day she'd say, "Leave me alone. I don't want to have children with you anymore." And the next day she said, "I wrote that foolishly and too quickly. You know, maybe I do want to have children." So she was very unsure. And, you know, she was 31 when she had children. I was 40. But that was older. That was quite a bit older in, you know, in that time period. So we won't ever really know. And it is tragic, but of course it's completely tragic that she died. But one thing that kind of irritated me a little bit is I feel like most of the reviews of the exhibition focused on, she died too young, true. What would she have become if she hadn't died? Of course, we all wonder that. But let's look at what she created. That's what I'd rather focus on, obviously. But yes.
We have time for one more question.
Oh, great.
That'll be with Mel over here.
Thank you.
I actually have lots of questions, but maybe the first one, the painting, the painting she pregnant with that one.
You put it close to your mouth. Yes.
Okay, that painting, the pregnancy, the most famous of hers, no, the other one, the with the necklace.
Yeah.
That reminds me of the photo Demi Moore when she pregnant.
Yes. On the cover of Vogue.
Right. So,
Absolutely.
So that make me think that photographer was quite.
Was that
she
Victor
was the first one. I never see other things before that. So, do we know much about that photographer took that photo?
That's a great question. I
Right.
have absolutely no idea. Let's ask Demi Moore. No, but that's a great question, because that's sort of the
Right.
celebration of pregnancy. But actually, before Demi Moore, I think it was Natasha Kinski, who was with her snake. So
Right.
it's kind of like a genre, and I think it's been resuscitated in the last year or so. I know I've seen other photographs of other women pregnant. So I don't know the question, but it really
So
is.
the point is, it's all about the woman artists, how they get noticed.
Mm-hmm.
So we have these photographer does these beautiful, innovative things. So far, none of us know who that photographer is. Isn't the same with these a lot of these female artists? They just so unknown, even though their work is get spread all over, copied all over. So
Yeah.
what do we do today to kind of, we have this awareness of a woman. I mean, if we just keep doing, we don't know.
No, I actually, does anyone know who that photographer is? Matthew Ralston. Okay, for some reason I thought it was Victor Skrybnevsky, but I'm sure you're right. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's a beautiful thing to celebrate the pregnant female form, and we don't really know why she did this. Was she hoping for it was 5-6 months before she even got pregnant, so she's not pregnant when she paints this, but it's an imaginary pregnancy. So does she want to become pregnant? And one thing I've asked myself is, she'd say, "I love looking at my rounded curves in the mirror." One thing I've asked myself is she even pregnant? Maybe that's just her body, you know? And it's hard to know, but I think it's easier to say she was definitely pregnant and she painted it because she wanted to become pregnant, or is that just what we want to do with the female body, is make them pregnant to explain their curves, you know what I mean? But anyway, I hope you all will tell all your friends to come see the show so Paula Modersohn-Becker's name will be better known. Thank you.